Give you a few seconds to get settled. Thanks so much for being here. Alrighty, so good afternoon and welcome to Possibilities, Challenges, and Complexities of Decolonizing Higher Education. We are thrilled to host Concordia Public Scholar and PhD candidate in education, Ezgi Ozyonum, who organized this important conversation with the Director of Decolonizing Curriculum and Pedagogy, Donna Goodleaf, who's also joining us today via Zoom. Ezgi's in the space with us here today. Thank you both so much for being here. And I'll pass it on to Ezgi very quickly so she can further contextualize this event and continue with proper introductions. But I just wanted to say that we are coming to you live from Concordia University's fourth space, where we are located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke. At Fourth Space, we facilitate daily activities that focus on what our Concordia community members are working on, especially in terms of various initiatives that are university-wide, as well as process-based research. So we're very thrilled to be able to host this conversation. And this conversation is in fact being recorded so that it might be transformed into a podcast down the line and released across our channels, so that you might also be able to revisit this conversation later down the line. And I'll put the links to our podcast channel in the chat in just a minute. So on that note, it's all I wanted to say, and I wanted to pass it over to you, Ezgi. Welcome in.
Thank you, Anna, for the introduction. Hi, welcome, great, everyone. I'm very excited to organize this event today, Possibilities, Challenges, Complexities of Decolonizing Higher Education. I'm a public scholar and a PhD candidate in education at Concordia. I'm researching on decolonizing strategies in Canadian universities and explores ways to include marginalized knowledges into our curriculum and pedagogy. I'm today so happy and glad to have Donna with me to address why it's important for the university to engage in decolonization. And I would like to learn more about the insights of this work from Donna. And I met with Donna in order to consult about my research. And I'm so happy today having this collaboration continues with her to have this conversation happen. So before we engage the conversation with Donna, I want to start showing a video of land acknowledgement, and then I will continue to mention what this land acknowledgement mean to me and mean to Concordia, and I will have a short welcome talk related to that.
I would like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous land. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many Indigenous nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous peoples and Canadian settlers. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous peoples and settler peoples within Tiohtià:ke or the Montreal community.
When the Indigenous Directions Leadership Council designed the territorial land acknowledgement for Concordia University, I think they did a wonderful job in connecting the meaning of that land acknowledgement with who we are as a university and the place where we're at. The acknowledgement makes reference to the Kanien'kehá:ka peoples as the custodians of the lands and the waters on which Concordia's campuses are located, but it also talks about Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, as a gathering point historically for many diverse First Nations, and of course today for people from around the world. And that diversity is something that marks Concordia. We have students coming not only from many Indigenous communities across Quebec, across Canada, across North America, and around the world. But we have students from 150 different countries at Concordia, speaking different languages, with different cultures. And I think expressing that in the territorial acknowledgement as a value and as something that we value is absolutely crucial to the identity of the university and the space that we are in.
My name is Donna Kahérakwas Goodleaf, and I'm standing on the land of Kaniakahaga, my community Gahnawage. I wanted to talk about the importance of the territorial land acknowledgement and why it's important for Concordia to express that and to also demonstrate what that means in relationship to Indigenous peoples, to Indigenous students, faculty and staff, and to the wider community. And I think that time has come where universities across Canada are beginning to wake up and to begin to start acknowledging and recognizing the land that these institutions have been built upon.
For those of us involved in higher education today, it's an opportunity to think about the importance of education in making things right and helping to improve society and to enable people to be the best contributors to the future that they can possibly be.
The timing is right where now we will come together and begin to open up those institutional spaces that we need as Indigenous peoples and to create the programs and services that will not only support and benefit Indigenous students, faculty and staff, but as well as Concordia University as a whole and local Indigenous communities. I'm really looking forward to working with the faculty and the staff and leadership in Concordia together, where we can really map out and begin to implement and bring to life all the mandate areas of the action plan.
Thank you, Donna, for producing this video for us that we can use in our events, in our conversations to elaborate this topic of decolonization. And it's also important for me to show this video because you're kindly teaching us the history and how to decolonize our institutions. And there are many students who comes and take education from Jagjaga and Montreal and leave without knowing the land that they took education from. So let me share briefly how I contextualize my interest and why I'm organizing this event today. For me, the process of decolonizing education is not isolated from the greater conversation about decolonization and colonialism within our societies. One of the decolonial theorists, Dr. Walter Mignora, mentions that coloniality is not over, but it is all over. And the intergenerational damage caused by colonial educational engagement with its harm to cultures, language, and heritage are still very much ongoing today. Now moving forward, we should put decolonizing in our effort forefront, and the path towards reconciliation is about building understanding together and repairing relationship in moving towards healing. To do so, many of those who are working in this field directly would say we each have a responsibility to learn about the past, how we got there, and in order to exchange this conversation and knowledge, we need to continue this debate in multi-levels in different spaces. And you always say, Donna, that decolonization begins with you. And we can ask ourselves what structural changes needs to take place, how I am contributing or profiting from formal colonial practices, and how I educate myself on this topic. So for me, I myself took majority of my education from Turkey, even though Turkey was not colonized in the terms of land conquering, because of the internationalization of colonial knowledge production, the Western universities has become more credentials than the other countries and other institutions. And now I feel Westernized universities is everywhere. And these higher education institutions keep perpetuating colonial engagement in the globe in different levels and different layers. And we are all suffering from oppression and colonialism. And when I moved to Canada, I believe it was my responsibility to learn the history of Canada. In doing so, I learned the additional layers of colonialism and the context of Canadian history. And I do believe we all have a role to disrupt systemic oppression, decenter dominant paradigms, and polarize voices, especially for those whose voice traditionally marginalized. I also think embracing the true history can make us stronger. This can unite the society and teaches our younger generation that we must always do our best, especially when it's hard. We have to have this uncomfortable and difficult conversation because it flags how important it is to decolonize our institutions. And 6 years ago, when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada raised 94 calls to action, some of the Canadian universities responded by launching their decolonizing and indigenization directions. And Concordia University also has the Indigenization Direction Action Plan. And you, Donna, you serve on the leadership group for this Indigenous direction. You have been involved in various collaboration with Concordia faculty, curriculum, and pedagogical practices across the university. And you also prepare involved in preparation for Concordia's land acknowledgement, and you really continue teaching and helping us how to decolonize in our institutions. And I'm really grateful today that we are having this conversation, and please everyone help me to welcome Donna. She is Turtle Clan. She's a citizen from Ghanaian Nation. She is the director of Decolonizing Curriculum and Pedagogy. And thank you, Donna Nawahan, to be here. And I'm happy to learn from you today. And I am sure that all of us will learn a lot from you. Thank you.
Nyawa, first, before I begin, I want to just introduce myself. Ezgi Ozyonum, Kahérakwas Goodleaf, Donna Kahérakwas Goodleaf, citizen of the Concordia Nation, which is part of the Haudenosaunee or Haudenosaunee Six Nations Iroquois Confederacy. So I'm speaking to you today. I'm in my community, and I wanted to acknowledge everybody and give my greetings and Thanksgiving to all of you and to you, Ezgi, for organizing this event. And I'm really happy to see that as a doctoral student that you are taking up this interest to really explore the importance of what decolonizing the university means. And so to me, this is one of the important conversations that is really, I think, good to have. And I think it's a good conversation that should also be had with the higher up of administration to also ask them about their thoughts around this whole process and their responsibilities. So like there's multiple layers, right? And so for me, I'm just really happy to be here with you all today and just sharing my thoughts about this and the critical work that is so necessary in terms of really, decolonizing the institution and what does that mean in the context of coming from an Indigenous perspective, right? So I just wanted to just say Nyama for this invitation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And whenever I have a conversation with you in terms of my research, in terms of decolonization before, you always give me some inspiration that I can reflect further and further. And I would like to start us off with the topic of land acknowledgement, that we all trying to learn how to integrate land acknowledgement into our classrooms, into the events. So I know that this is not a checklist, that okay, we included land acknowledgement, then we can move forward. And you always encourage us to use land acknowledgement to make it authentic. So I would like to ask you in regard of that what is Concordia's vision or your vision to integrate land acknowledgement and the video that you produce or the statement that you produce, and how we could take them as a tool and use it in our classrooms?
So when I came on board here at Concordia University a few years ago, there was a working group of Indigenous students, and there was a student from my community, Wahesu White Bean, who was very instrumental in working with Indigenous faculty and students and staff in developing the territorial land acknowledgement for Concordia. And I was really happy to see that work. And then I decided to bring it at another level, and let's make a video of it with the president. And so for me, it's about visibility, right? It's about launching and putting Indigenous peoples, talking about our lands, making it visible, putting it in the forefront, right? And so the creation, the idea, and the purpose of this video with the President Graham Carr was to not only show him about what this really means about when you make a territorial land acknowledgement. It is not about being a performative act where everybody just says it and then that's it, right? It's like how government treats, Indigenous policies, right? They put it up on the shelf and then that's it, right? It's about the commitment. It's about linking his presence on the land and the accountability and the responsibilities that the university has in relationship to Indigenous peoples, to my community, in terms of really supporting the work that we are doing as Indigenous peoples at Concordia, be it faculty, students, and staff, who are struggling to really make change to, when I say change, when I'm talking about decolonizing, it's on multiple levels, right? It's not just curriculum, but it's also examining the structural policies and practices that are in place that maintain the privilege of Eurocentric, oppressive policies that have been designed to be barriers and contribute to the erasure of Indigenous peoples, right? Our history, our voices, our perspectives, as well as other oppressed peoples, right? Marginalized peoples. So for me, I see it as a tool. And in the work that I do with faculty and with grad students who are wanting to become faculty, right? And also as students in the classroom, is to take up that, courage and to challenge and to find ways of how do you now use this territorial land acknowledgement as an educational tool that can be a tool of resistance, and also to kind of bring it into the curriculum where as faculty and as students, you're engaging in the discussions around what this land acknowledgement means in relationship to Indigenous peoples. What does it mean when Concordia is built on Kanien'kehá:ka lands? What is that? What's that? What exactly does that mean, right? How are we benefiting from this? Like, how is my community benefiting from the fact that Concordia is built on our people's lands? I have not seen any kind of resource income coming into our community, as an example, right? Like, I think about these things, right? And so while I'm at Concordia, I know that, it's very complex. It's a very complex challenge because when we talk about decolonizing the institution, the work I do comes from a curriculum and pedagogical framework approach, but it also means examining the structures and policies that are in place that are contributing to the erasure of Indigenous peoples. So, and what does that mean in terms of taking up, as students and as faculty, taking up that responsibility to educate yourselves about what this means, and also how do we realign it in a way that, like I'm talking about curriculum, right? In a way that really reflects, authentically reflects Indigenous voices and perspectives, our history, our lived experiences, right? In a way that, that is very respectful, and not to treat us as an artifact in the past. We are still here, and we are asserting our rights to create institutional spaces that we need as Indigenous peoples in the university systems to allow us to design, and it has to be Indigenous led, to design our own programs, our own services that are for us and by us, right? To meet our needs. And so the struggle here is not only carving out the necessary institutional spaces that we need, but also then my work is also about how do I work with faculty and students, to really understand the importance of this work. And so when I talk about decolonizing the curriculum, there's multiple definitions around that. Well, for me, it's very simple. It's about the active engagement, about really beginning with yourself. Like I always say in the workshops, is that it's about really engaging in a critical analysis about your own educational experiences and how that has informed your kind of perceptions and beliefs and attitudes towards Indigenous peoples, and then your relationship or non-relationship with Indigenous peoples, and how has that been informed and in the design of your curriculum, right? And I'm talking about from a faculty position. And then how you relate to Indigenous peoples, students in the classroom, how does that get manifested, right? And so there's layers to this, right? So one is to kind of really engage with yourself, the need to go through that, so you're not disconnected from this work, but you're a part of it. And so when you do that process, then it's like looking at your course syllabus, looking at your curriculum and critiquing language, that is perpetuating Eurocentric canons of thought in the curriculum, right? Looking at the course outline and critiquing that. Then it's working with faculty to kind of realign the whole course outline in a way that integrates respectfully Indigenous voices and perspectives throughout the whole course. And so for me, there's that, it's important to create the co-constructions of a relationship with faculty and students and work with me so we can facilitate this kind of exchange of a dialogue, a conversation, and then the work that is needed, right, to create that kind of decolonizing curriculum that decenters Eurocentric canons of thought. But also, so it's not just, going through that thing, but also then it's the change that is necessary. So it's manifesting a whole curriculum change. And then it's also identifying and examining what are the structures and policies that are in place that are barriers, to move and to create a curriculum that truly reflects our Indigenous perspectives. It's about elevating, right? So it's not just the curriculum work, but also it's departmental policies and practices. So those are structures, right? So it's like there's these layers that you have to take into consideration, and it starts with you, and it's about a commitment. And it's a lot of hard work, but what's the reward at the end? And to me, what's your vision of education? As educators and as students, you have a very powerful voice. What kind of education do you want that is truly one that gives you that cultivates the critical consciousness that is needed and the active behaviors for change, to become change agents, right? In a way that you're going to work to change and the thinking and the behaviors, and to challenge the oppressive behaviors of policies and practices and the attitudes. And then what are we for? What kind of education do you want in a way that truly centers Indigenous histories and voices and perspectives, but also then it also takes into consideration the multiple cultural voices and perspectives of other peoples. So that to me is how, you kind of decenter, Eurocentric canons of thought, right? But because we're in Turtle Island and because you're specifically in Kanien'kehá:ka territory, it's important to localize the curriculum to reflect our history from our worldview, our voice, and not Quebec history, not Canadian history, but you have to start with us first and then bring it outward. So getting back to the territorial land acknowledgements, this is so important, it's related. And at the same time, there's a lot of criticism that rightfully so by Indigenous peoples about territorial land acknowledgements. I agree, because we've seen how they are just performative acts and they're just empty words. And where does that get you, right? Well, for me, I'm looking at it, well, how do we use it as a tool to kind of inwardly decolonize the curriculum in a way that you make connections with it, and outwardly is also getting the university to really get an understanding about its accountability to our community. How are we benefiting from Concordia being on our lands? I haven't seen that yet.
Thank you so much for giving a really broader vision for us that what is decolonization of curriculum and pedagogy looks like, and how it really integrated with all the policy, with faculties, that it's a complex structure. And you also mentioned some of the barriers that it's already set in place with the policies that we need to also push them forward. And my question then, after you sharing the vision of the Concordia University about decolonization, I wonder about the current ownership of the departments within Concordia University, whether they really reflect the vision that you share today with us. Would you say that just a handful faculty are involved and implementing, or it's already adopted for all the departments? And what are your vision and strategies to enlarge the cycle and having the discourses of decolonization in many layers and levels, and including the policy at the Concordia University? What would you say about this ownership?
It's a good question. Let's be real about this. Since I've been here, the work I've been doing has been very, because I'm the only one. And so it's been very, it's a lot of work. And so I've been meeting with, the workshops that I hold through the Center for Teaching and Learning has been one strategy of reaching out to a lot of faculty who come from different departments and participate in the workshops. And then it's working with them either as a team or on an individual basis. I'm in the process of, needing to write up a strategic plan to meet with the deans and the chairs, which then can filter down to the departments and work with faculty. And to me, I think that that's a whole layer of work that that is needing to be done. And I'm working on that. And also, needing to hire an army of people that is needed, right? And so because I'm just in this one position as is, and it's just me, I'm just trying to do what I can. I can say that, I've been very happy to see the work coming out of the communications department. I've been working with the chair of communications, and she's been very consistent, Professor Monica Gagnon. and other, faculty from the department that have been really interested and very committed. I've been working, participating in Decolonizing STEM's curriculum committee. So there's these committees that are formed, but it's not yet coming from a whole departmental across the department. And so that will take time. And it's also to be, there's a need to also be very aware of that, designing a strategic plan is not going to be a prescription for all departments, because all the departments are very unique and different. And so it's about engaging in conversations with the deans and with the chairs and then with the faculty. So I've been kind of working inward and going across, and now I'm making my way to go meet with senior management to kind of discuss, what the vision is, the action plan, and the work that is under my mandate. So, but it's moving. It's not moving fast enough, but again, because this is a very complex process, and there's no at the end of the year, university is going to be decolonized, no, or it's not going to be about, a faculty person who's taking my workshops, and then they're decolonize. Well, no, it doesn't work that way. It's a lifelong commitment to this work. But what's important is that there are people that are committed to this and want to move forward, and those are the ones that I work with. I'll dedicate my time, and at the same time also reach out to other senior management as well. So
thank you so much for sharing the collaborations that you are taking place. And this leads me a question regarding on Indigenous and non-Indigenous allyship. And as I totally agree that decolonizing is a lifetime commitment, it's a work that it's ongoing and it will continue in our lifetimes. And while we are working, or you are working in your position, decolonizing our institutions, what advice would you give for Indigenous and non-Indigenous allyships? Because educating oneself is only the half of the work as being an ally, but it's also a lifetime process that is rooted in action. It requires humility and ongoing self-reflection. So I would like to learn how to build relationship based on trust, consistency, accountability. So how we could have this Indigenous and non-Indigenous allyships?
I think that's a very important question. And I think for me, what comes to mind is the first thing is I want to have a conversation with you. I want to meet you. I want to know who you are, and start from there, because and that takes time. Building relationships with us, with our communities, is not going to, happen overnight. It's about really being patient and understanding the importance of what it means for us, in building a relationship that can be trustful, that can be meaningful, and come to a place where we can come to a mutual understanding and agreement about our particular roles and how do we support each other. So what this means is not to take the lead, not to be the one in the lead to speak on our behalf. That's our role, So it's important that the work we do always has to come from Indigenous peoples, being in that lead, and then for people who are allies, it's listening to us, and also at the same time also taking up your responsibilities to educate your colleagues, your allies about this, right? And not to appropriate our voices. and our perspectives, in this process. So it's about really sitting down and how do we respectfully listen to each other, but not impose, and not, assume that lead on our behalf, because then it's like you're perpetuating that kind of, you're better than us kind of thing. You know what I mean? So it's really important that people have a full understanding about, when you're building relationships with us, that takes time. And for me, I want to have a conversation. Like, who are you? Where are you from? And what is your purpose? What's your interest? And yeah, so.
Thank you. And it shows also the perspective of that it's vital for Indigenous perspective to be prioritized in decolonization. And in a way that it's a different to assume that Indigenous people should do all the work, that we need allyships, and we need to have this conversation to really figure it out how the decolonization work could be shared across Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And as we said, I would like to go back to that point about decolonizing institutions, and you said that it's a lifetime commitment. Recently, I went to one of the conferences about decolonizing higher education, and there was a First Nations scholar, Dr. Lindsay Morcombe, from Queen's University. She made a very interesting point for me that I would like to bring this topic to this conversation in her idea in this today's conversation, that she said universities can be decolonized, but cannot fully indigenized. Rather than making Western institutions more comfortable and relatable for Indigenous students, we need to elevate the credentials of Indigenous educational institutions. Indigenous scholars who are well educated in Indigenous knowledge can do better in Indigenous institutions than Queen University. Although she still agrees that Western institutions needs to change, she claims that Western institutions doesn't need to be all about what Indigenous people do. I really wonder, what is your opinion about this?
That's a very interesting point. So here's my take on this, and I'll be very honest with you. I agree that, I agree that for me, my primary, my primary goal is because I'm in an institution, I'm at Concordia, I find my place there, right? So I'm walking in two worlds, but my commitment is to my people and to my community. So for me, what's important is how do I figure out a way of how do I create programs that elevate and support our own Indigenous educational institutions. I agree with her, this person, in saying this, that yes, it's important for us to create and to validate. However, not all of us have the funding to build our own university systems, and for me, that is a long-term vision that I think that many Indigenous peoples have, right, is how do we also build our own educational institutions? So with that aside, so I look at my role here at Concordia, and yes, we're not going to completely, I'm very clear on this, we're not going to completely decolonize this Western educational system. What's important is how do we go about create and open up those spaces that we need for us, and at the same time create our own programs and services that we need for us, and at the same time create land-based education systems that are in our community, that where the university has no, there's no a Western intellectual knowledge that's being taught in our communities in land-based education, right? Because it's in our lands and the whole educational experience is very different. we're drawing upon our own community educators, our knowledge holders in the design and bringing our students back on the land. And so for me, it's about creating viable, robust educational learning experiences that can manifest some kind of change, you know, and in ways that uplift our people, our students, that validates who they are as Nkwanhume people, that, you know, validates their history, their voices, their perspectives, their stories, right? And so, you know, so for me, it's like, okay, so I'm in Concordia and it's like, okay, so I'm doing this work, but then also, how do I also create work that allows me to bring it back home and build that up as well? So to me, because I have a responsibility, you know, I have a responsibility to my people, and I want to make sure that the future generation, the current youth that are rising up and entering into Concordia University, we better make sure that we have strong Indigenous programs, Indigenous faculty, services that will support our students, you know, where they're not subject to any more institutional racism or traumatizing our students in the classrooms, but that we have a robust list of Indigenous strong scholars that were in the university system, but also it's allowing us to also create different learning experiences outside of the institution. So it's like both on site and then in our communities, right? So for me, there's these different layers of strategies that I'm working towards, right? And so, and you know, I can, you know, so it's like it's about how you design and how you kind of envision what this work is. And for me, it's multiple strategies, right? So it's like, you know, creating the spaces we need, the programs, working with faculty, you know, who want to come on board and really engage and manifest change to support Indigenous people, as well as creating the spaces we need outside of those institutions and bring it home in our own communities. And to me, the university system has a responsibility to support and build up our own infrastructures that we need to build our own higher educational systems in our community. Now, that would be a really concrete example of that kind of, when we talk about territorial land acknowledgements, that's what that is. That, to me, that is that kind of, you know, way of giving back to our people, right? Because they're benefiting, you know, from being built, you know, there's a university on our lands, and how are we benefiting from that? We're not right now. So that's how I see it, is that as Indigenous peoples, we need to build our own educational institutions, and at the same time, you know, make the university accountable in supporting, you know, and how do we do that? So.
Thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to see more examples of Indigenous educational institutions to be upfront and to have the credential that it deserves, that they have. I know that in Regina University that they have the university next to it, the First Nations University, and maybe we will have more examples. And there are already institutions, maybe they don't really look like the way how we function university, but it may look very different, but still it's the education institution that it bring maybe the Indigenous knowledge within itself, that's the Indigenized university that we are looking for to see. But at the same time, I agree that outside of university, while these initiatives are taking place, inside the university, there should be also transformation taking place. And one of the things I observed that when I visited University of British Columbia, the topic of language and I could see the signs of Musqueam street signs in the campus, and while I'm having conversation with you, I also started to learn and pick up some words like Gwe or Niawan. Maybe I pronounce not so well, but I try to more engage and impose myself with the language. What are the next steps for Concordia University in terms of acknowledging the linguistic heritage?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry. Is it the way how I speak didn't come through?
No, you went off. The sound went off.
Oh, sorry. My question is related.
I heard your question. What is Concordia's next steps with regards to linguistic? I think that, well, it's I think that as Indigenous peoples, it's important that we are in our communities, we're building up and revitalizing our own language for sure. And I think that the universities, in my opinion, it also should be a place where, as Indigenous peoples, we develop our own language programs to support the language learning development of our students who are coming from our communities where Kanyekeha is their first language, for example. So a vision can be is why not offer courses where it's being taught in Kanyekeha, where they're debating and they're reading and it's developing that kind of linguistic intellectual development around being able to to teach in our language, where it's not just learning language but also they're reading books or materials that is from our own people, right? So it's cultivating and nourishing that intellectual capacity. And so for me, I know that that's something that that is in the plans that the senior director for Indigenous Directions is looking at. It's in the action plan, and so it's there, and it's going to be worked on. But I see the value. I know that the First People Studies program, they have courses that they offer for different nations, but that's difficult because they can't find speakers to teach their classes. So yeah,
it seems that's one of the challenges right now that the decolonizing higher education is facing. I also want to open stage for our participants today, our audience, that if they have any questions to Donna, please put it in the chat, that we could also have you engaging with us in this conversation of decolonizing. While I'm inviting others and we wait for them to submit their questions, I have another question related to decolonizing disciplines. So what I mean, decolonizing disciplines. So what I mean is, while you engage decolonizing curriculum and pedagogy and decolonizing our institutions, I feel and I do believe that we cannot differentiate it from the decolonizing the whole science or decolonizing the discipline itself. And I do believe now, even in Concordia University, that there are examples is coming. There are some insights, for example, decolonizing STEM education, decolonizing different disciplines, and they are working on. And maybe there are some disciplines, maybe they are not really aware and put effort on decolonizing the discipline. So I wonder, what can we do about this, and with your engagement with the faculty, because decolonizing is also pluralizing the voices, that it's not only we do check marks of, okay, we do in this way, not this way, the approach, but it's also bringing the knowledge, bringing the different ways of knowing into our curriculum. So I wonder whether you have some maybe success stories, maybe some challenging stories that you would like to share. What has been your experience concretely with decolonizing a discipline at Concordia?
Well, when you're talking about discipline, that's like a whole, like the sciences, for example, right? And I just know that based on my experience, I've done like workshops working for the Center for Engineering and Society, and talking about ways of how do we decolonize the engineering curriculum, right? And so, but I haven't seen any concrete steps in terms of actual course curriculum changes, you know, so I don't, you know, to me, that's like the ongoing work that is necessary, but it also means planning with the department and with the faculty. How do we do this, you know? And so, you know, I can say that in working with the chair of communications department, we begun to look at ways of how do we, what strategy can we use when we talk about decolonizing the whole departmental curriculum. So for me, it was like giving an example of why don't we look at what are the core courses that students have to take when they come in, when they enter into the communications program, and then what are the core courses that they have to take when they exit out. So that way it doesn't become, you know, really like really complex and comprehensive, but how do we start off at a really concrete minimal stage that's more manageable? And so that is one strategy that we are looking at. And so identifying some courses and that core courses students have to take, and then looking at the exit courses that they have to take. So that's one way of how to begin a process, right? So
yeah, it seems that we will need many resources while we are decolonizing institutions and discipline. It seems that there is a need for resources, and I just wonder whether you are currently working on what types of toolkits, or is there any kind of workbook is coming on, maybe the allyship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, or a toolkit for how we could integrate the territorial land acknowledgement in the classroom? Is there any kind of resources, building a resources work is happening currently?
I think if you go to my the decolonization hub on the Center for Teaching and Learning, there I have a video that I do that kind of explains my process in working with faculty on decolonizing their work, but also there's a whole list of resources for faculty to take it upon themselves to start educating themselves about this work, and then just like go from there. I mean, that development of these toolkits is really critical, but again, like I didn't have time. I'm not like, I don't have the resources to do that, you know, but it's important to have. But I think that if they go to visit that decolonization hub, it's a really good place to start, and it'll give faculty a lot of the resources that they need in understanding what decolonizing their curriculum means. And then there's a lot of resources that they can explore and integrate in the different courses, different departmental, subject areas.
Yeah, thank you. And I could see on the chat that Anna is now posting the links for us to reach out and find out the resources is already, and I do believe that it will continue developing and to be more accessible to everyone. So I have a question on the chat, and the question says that from Joseph: hello Donna, do you have any suggestions for an Indigenous approach to grading? It seems like the competitive nature of the GPA, which is 4.3 system of ranking, the students from the best to the worst performance in the class is a colonial approach. Is there any existing Indigenous model for student evaluations? Thank you.
That's a very good question. To be honest, I don't know, like when I think about that, again, it's the structure, right? It's the structure that's in place that is making faculty have to follow a particular structure of how you go about assessing the learning experiences that students have, that have gained, in your classroom. And so for me, like I'll give you an example. Students going through a land-based education program, like students being out on the land, how do you assess them, right? Well, it's, there's different ways to do that. One is from the land-based facilitators is if students complete the task that they are given in terms of survival skill tasks, if they master that particular task, then they've passed, right? But also, it's also getting students to also use their stories, draw upon storytelling as a technique of getting students to interpret what they learned, drawing from their lived experiences. And it's hard because it's qualitative, and yet you've got to put a quantitative mark. And so that's the cultural mismatch of that. So I don't have a direct answer for you. That's a very good question, but that's an example of a particular structure that is in place that needs to be looked at in terms of changing in a way that really reflects the lived experiences of students in the classroom.
Thank you so much. I agree with you that grading is one portion, but how we putting different assignments are the different way to look at this problem as well, that we need to diversify these written assignments to more oral assignments, storytelling assignments, or more visual and artwork that we can really influence in that way. And the grading is also, Joseph, thank you for your question, because that's also very important to look at why we are assessing the students, how we are assessing even whom putting this grading standards, that how in the classrooms we could give voices to the students, that student sovereignty is really uplift in the classrooms.
But also, how are you also accommodating? It's also providing ways of accommodating to the diverse learning needs of the students in the classroom as well. So for me, you want to make it strength-based, and so you want to involve the students and having them, be empowered and take charge of what is it that they want to look at in terms of gauging what they've learned. So have them be a part of that conversation.
Definitely, because decolonization is also, it's about make our curriculum and pedagogy relevant to the students that we have in the classrooms and our institutions. So I'm looking at the time. It seems we have 2 minutes left. So I just want to take your final words, Donna, for this event, that if you would like to give a last message to our audience, for those who is listening and joining us today, I was happy to hear your last words, that what we could take away to go home today.
Okay, well, I just want to reiterate the importance of this work, and I guess I want to ask a question of you, Ezgi, like, what do you intend to do next now? So that way our conversation doesn't just become a conversation, but then what are you going to do to take back and engage in?
Yeah, thank you so much, because each time when we have a conversation, I have so much to think, really reflect on. One of the things that I'm planning to do is how I can really use land acknowledgement and to make it more authentic to my own positionality, to my own reality for the future classrooms or events, or in my research that I'm taking forward. That's one of the takeaways for me. The other one is always having this conversation with many indigenous people and non-indigenous people, and to the students and how they feel in the classroom. So these are my priorities for the next steps. And thank you so much for today, that you really inspire all of us with your own perspective, with bringing the experience of Concordia University currently, how they and Concordia University involved in decolonization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nyawa Goa, for inviting me to be here with you, and I really appreciate this time. So Nyawa.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both. We appreciate your time as well. Thank you for joining us via Zoom and in person, and to our audience who have been joining us in the Zoom and on YouTube. Thanks for being here, for listening, for thinking through some of these ideas and questions. And we appreciate you just partaking in this conversation in this way. I will remind you that we will be editing this conversation and re-releasing it, gently editing with love and care, and re-releasing as a podcast so that you might experience some of these ideas again in a different format, and perhaps spur on further conversations with your friends and colleagues across our communities. Okay, folks, so on that happy note, we will say goodbye to you now and wish you a great day and welcome you back into the space. We're here Monday through Friday, so check out what's on the schedule and stop by, say hello, and see how you can get involved. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.